All right, everyone. Well, we're going to get started. So, welcome to Coffee and COrVIDs, hosted by the Indiana Audubon Society. My name is Sam Warren, and I am the outreach coordinator here with IAS. We are right now recording so that if you get kicked off or you can only join us for a certain amount of time, it'll be uploaded to YouTube. And we are also live on Facebook. So if you're joining us on Facebook, you can participate there as well, but just know that there's like a 20-second delay. Otherwise, please join us on Zoom for the live one. 1 second. Okay, so we're gonna get started today. Our theme is hawk watching in Indiana, or raptor and hawk watching, and our own executive director, Brad Bumgardner, is joining us for discussion on that. You won't need binoculars. I think someone asked in the chat, and you don't need coffee, but of course, if you have it, cheers to you this morning.
Yeah.
So I just realized, so we've been doing Coffee and COrVIDs for a while, and I realized that never in my intro trivia did I have anything about coffee. I always had bird stuff. So I just have 5 little quick questions about coffee. It's multiple choice, and you don't have to do the chat. You can just say out loud and take your guesses on coffee. So the first question is, what do you think the annual consumption by cups is worldwide? And it's multiple choice. First choice is A, 600 million, B, 3 billion, or C, 400 billion. Cups of coffee annually worldwide.
C.
It is C. It's 400 billion cups.
Yeah.
Nice work. Worldwide annually. So that equates to, or it's the equivalent of 1.4 billion cups of coffee a day. So congrats if you're contributing to that. Second question, for coffee, where does it rank on the world's most traded commodities? So would it be like number 1, number 2? I have answer A is 7. It's the 7th most traded. B, it's the 2nd, number 2. Or C, it's the 5th most traded commodity in the world. 7, 2, or 5?
5.
It is 2. You're on a roll. Nice work. It is the 2nd most traded commodity in the world.
Will the prize be 400 cups of it? 400 billion?
Yeah, it must be. So the number 1 is oil, of course. So it's right behind oil. All right, next question.
Fruit or like vegetable, or are we lumping them all together?
Good question. I don't know.
Glad you asked that.
Next question. Approximately, on average, how long do coffee plants live for if they're well taken care of? Is it A, 10 to 20 years, B, 30 to 40 years, or C, 40 to 50 years? Average.
40 to 50.
10 to 20.
It is 40 to 50. Nice work, Patty. On average, they live about 40 to 50 years if you take good care of them, but some of them have been recorded to live as long as 100 years. So pretty big range.
If you ask it again, I'll get it.
You were so close.
Yeah.
Next question. In the United States, approximately what % of coffee drinkers take their coffee black normally? Is it A, 30%, B, 50%, or C, 60%?
B.
B?
You think 30? Well, my partner here says 30%, but I think 50.
I think 30.
Should have gone with your partner. It's 30.
30.
Most people take milk or creamer in their coffee, so only 30% normally drink it.
Or whatever that fancy stuff Starbucks does.
Right, exactly. Which leads to my next question so Starbucks is the biggest coffee retailer in the world. I didn't make that a question because I thought it was too obvious. But what do they sell the most of by volume? Is it A, black coffee, B, espresso, or C, milk?
Milk.
C.
Yeah, C. I'm with Patty.
It is milk. Nice work. So, actually, by
There you go,
volume, they
Patty.
sell more milk. Which would make sense when when COVID happened, that dairy farmers lost a lot of an outlet to sell at because they weren't selling as much Starbucks. So, but yeah, that's just a little coffee trivia to get the day started. It seems like, Brad, thank you. There's about a 16-second delay if you're on Facebook. So again, welcome to Coffee and COrVIDs. Our topic this week is raptor and hawk watching with our own executive director, Brad. If you guys have any questions, I think some of you are new, so welcome. But if you have any questions, feel free to butt in or anything like that. Otherwise, you can use the chat if you want as well, and we'll be trying to go back and forth from chat and Facebook and answering questions. So it's just supposed to be interactive discussion. So, Brad, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Anybody like hawks by chance? Hawk fans, raptors, birds of prey, kind of meh, maybe some people. A lot
Was
of
it
time,
exciting to see one?
yeah. And there's a study that was out a few years ago, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they were categorizing and surveying the demographics for bird watchers, and one of the things that they surveyed was different questions related to how you found birds, whether they classify yourself as a bird watcher. Because if you're visiting a fish and wildlife property, then you're having an impact, and they didn't know how many of those are visiting a fish and wildlife property, where we know hunters and fishermen because they pay taxes on the products that they buy. That goes to the Pitzman Robertson Fund, which goes to fund these properties, but there isn't a binocular tax, so we don't know necessarily how many birders are out there visiting a property. So they were surveying bird watchers, and as part of that survey, they asked them, what types of birds do you go travel to see? And can you guess what the number one category of birds that people travel to see the most are?
Not hawks.
No, not hawks. Yeah. Number one, birds of prey are the ones that people go travel the most. They have the most interest in, and those could be different hawk watching sites. There's great like Hawk Mountain, but it probably also includes things like the Eagle Watch weekends that occur at a lot of the Indiana state parks, or if you go in Illinois, Starved Rock is a place for that. So there's a lot of great opportunities to see that. So hawk watching and birds of prey is the number one category that people like to travel and see. So besides hawks, anybody know?
Waterfowl.
You say waterfowl?
Yeah.
Other guesses?
Shorebirds.
Warblers.
Cranes.
Is songbirds warblers?
Warblers are a type of songbird, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the number two is what they collectively call waterbirds. And so those would probably include waterfowl. They would probably include the cranes. They probably include pelicans too. Collectively, think of like as Marsh Madness. Marsh. So that probably is a lot of birds people are able to see. And then the number three group of birds.
There's a lot of people that go out on the lakes, the Great Lakes and the oceans to look at water birds that are out there. All these gulls and terns, and a lot of them.
So we're a little biased here in Indiana. We're not considering those water birds. But yeah, there's a lot of those pelagic seabirds would definitely count. So anyone that's going on a pelagic boat ride is looking for some of the different terns and albatrosses, so that they would certainly count, I think, in the in that group of water birds. So we have hawks, we have water birds, and then the third most popular group of birds that people travel to see.
Tropical, rainforest.
Nobody said sparrows. No.
We don't have to
Does it
travel.
include
They're
seeing
here.
them if I'm shooting and eating them?
And so,
I like how we just ignored that.
Hummingbird.
John had it. Warblers. Warblers is the number 3. So I guess tropical in essence too, since the majority of them go down to the neotropics to spend the winter. So people are traveling, thinking like birding festivals like that, going to the Indiana Dunes, or the biggest week in Ohio to see those warblers that are coming through. And here in Indiana, we have 36 regular occurring warbler species. So hawks, waterbirds, and warblers are the top 3 groups of birds that people go to travel and see. And certainly, even though they're bigger, hawk watching can be a pretty difficult bird ID. Oftentimes you're looking really far, and they're real kind of tiny specks in the sky. And so I wanted to show you kind of a couple of them that we go after here in Indiana that people seek out to find. It doesn't tend to be something you see a lot of, like you see a lot of warblers. Hawk watching is a little more difficult in Indiana because those best hawk watching sites have kind of a funneling point that concentrate a lot of the birds, where we don't really have a lot of land features like we have on those mountain ridge tops or peninsulas out into a lake or ocean that would actually concentrate a lot of these hawks. But by far one of the best sites that we do have is the Indiana Dunes. There's a spring pileup that occurs there where these birds are coming up to the lakefront, and once they get up to the lake shore, then they have to turn because a lot of these guys are riding thermals. And so if you are a bird that's dependent on thermals like the hawks and the cranes, you hit Lake Michigan and it becomes a sink. And so you then have to start flapping your wings. You're not getting that rising hot air. So a lot of birds will kind of pile up onto Lake Michigan and then they turn left or right to kind of get around the lake. So that kind of becomes one of the most popular hawk watching sites I can think of. And that's in the spring. Now in the fall, these birds are funneling down the lake. They kind of go along Lake Michigan, whether in the Wisconsin or Michigan side, and even through parts of Illinois, and then they go straight south. So they don't kind of wrap back into the dunes. So the Indiana Dunes becomes a much better spring hawk watching site versus a fall hawk watching site. Since you don't have landforms to really funnel the birds, we don't see a lot of heavy migration sites where people are watching hawks in Indiana compared to some of the other states. I have heard reports, though, that if you get a nice warm spring day throughout the month of April and early May, even late March, when you're getting the first eagles and such that are moving through, get to a state park fire tower. And there we have a nice unobstructed view. And I know there's been a few counts down in southern Indiana, say in the Morgan Monroe State Forest near the reservoir. They get up in some of those fire towers and they can actually watch, especially once you get to the peak of the broadwing hawks migration, and they're coming through, by the hundreds. And then of course you hear about these other reports from some places that see them by the thousands. It's really, great funneling spots. But I actually do have some images I want to share with you guys today. So I'm going to share my screen here really quick and see if I can do this. And so let me see. There we go. So here we go. Can you guys see that? You guys are shaking your heads. Okay. And so I do want to look at basically is not just looking at a raptor, but raptors in flight become the most critical part, since that's typically how we see them. And when I'm talking about raptors today, and I'm talking about hawks that are migrating through, I refer to, I got a couple groups of them. I'm going to see if I can get there we go, get the screen moving there. So different types. So name all the different types of raptors that you can think of in Indiana. What do we have?
Falcons, accipiters, and buteos.
So we have falcons, buteos, mentioned eagles. Any
I guess
others?
vultures.
So oftentimes vultures are usually lumped in there as
Lots
well.
of vultures.
Too much about vultures, but they're usually counted right alongside hawks at these hawk watching sites, and very similar flights and such. But obviously a different ID that we can usually tell a little easier than some of the other hawks. So I have down. Mouse isn't wanting to work today. There we go. I have 2 categories. I have diurnal raptors, and so there's our eagles. I have our harriers. No one mentioned that. A real distinct group. Of course, not very numerous in species, but worldwide there are several different kinds. How about buteos? So buteos are those hawks that are big and bulky. They have shorter tails and broader wings, versus our accipiters, where our accipiters tend to have much longer tails and really short wings. And these are adaptations for their hunting style. And a lot of it has to do with the habitats that they live in. And so if you're a buteo, you're kind of soaring the sky with those big giant wings. Or if you're an accipiter, you're using really short wings, and they're not going to give you necessarily the speed, or you might be able to stay aloft as much, but they're going to give you more maneuverability. And so the accipiters tend to be more forest hawks. So you've seen them zipping between trees when you see that kind of style. And that long tail really helps also with the steering ability. And so they can kind of bank left or right really quickly. And which is why a lot of our accipiters we know as the bird-eating hawks. You know, the old names like chicken hawk, and anything you might be seeing coming to your bird feeder. So those are accipiters.
Brad, did you say what a harrier is?
A harrier is a type of hawk that's usually, traditionally, if you ever heard the name marsh hawk, that's the old name for the harrier. Really, really long-winged but long tail as well. And then they have this kind of a facial disc that's very owl-like in their face. And harriers typically do hunt over open marshes, but they also like a lot of prairies and field-like areas. So in the wintertime, if you ever go out along the edges of airports or Kankakee Sands or some of the reclaimed minefields where you're looking for short-eared owls to pop up at sunset, that same type of habitat is where you got the harriers. And so I kind of think of like the short-eared owls are like the B shift, they're the night shift. And then as you arrive there to look for them, the A shift is clocking out for the day. And those are the last harriers. They're kind of cruising over the field. And so they're able to use those large, long wings to just kind of soar really close right over the top of the grasses in search of food. And so they do have a good ability to hover as well. And so, you know, there's birds that can do that. And so, you know, if you're familiar with like military harriers, you know, the same kind of concept there. Falcons, so there's our fifth group of diurnal raptors that we're talking about. So falcons are known for speed. And so these guys have medium length tails, but long and then really pointed wings. And so real like kind of swallow-like. And so it gives them some amazing speed and capabilities to pursue prey. And of course, the most famous of those is the peregrine falcon, which you've probably heard is, you know, can stoop the 200 miles an hour. Puts a force on their prey that's tremendous. They basically just kill them with the strike that they do on them. And I always think, you know, how does like a little 1-pound bird, even at whatever speed it's going, you know, have that kind of force? And I've had the opportunity this year to participate in the peregrine falcon bandings across the state with our biologist John Strolly, and I've literally walked off of some of these nesting sites after banding, and I have a headache. And I'm wearing a full helmet, safety helmet on my head. Just the strikes from that bird continuously right on my head was so hard that just I had a pounding headache from them. So they can hit a lot of strength. And so is finesse, yeah. Castrelli is retired, but he loves to work with the Falcons, and that has been his baby for the last 30 years. So it's hard to get him to walk away from it. So he's still doing it under contract for the DNR. So there's our diurnal raptors. You guys forgot one, though. I haven't heard anyone mention.
Are we counting owls?
So if we're going to do diurnal raptors, then we have to do...
I mean, but barred owls are kind of diurnal.
And so if we're going to do diurnal raptors, we got to do nocturnal raptors. It's a much shorter category, though, of course. Nocturnal raptors include owls. And so, you know, but, you know, right here in Indiana, we have 8 species of owls that are regularly seen over the course of the year. 9 if you actually include a couple of burrowing owl that we have. All right.
Would you say harriers are diurnal or more crepuscular?
They would probably be more crepuscular. So they're active at really early morning hours, and they're active especially again in the evening hours. Where a lot of the birds of prey, this is what's great, is that if you're a bird watcher and you don't like to get up early, hawks can be your thing because they don't either. And so a lot of these birds, especially in migration, they're waiting on the thermals to pick up. And so basically, you know, at 6, 7 a.m., they kind of, I'm going to stay here, just kind of hang out in my roost for a while. And then I'll go flying around once it gets to 9 a.m. And there's some thermals to fly around, and especially too with the turkey vultures. You see them all kind of in their communal roost oftentimes the morning, sitting all on a big power structure or in a tree before they fly off for the day, and they can effortlessly. But this is where, since they are in flight, where silhouettes become really important. And a lot of it is that wing shape and the tail shape we were talking about, where the accipiters, have that really long tail versus the much shorter tail, the buteo that you see there in the lower right corner. And it's not only just that type of shape, but also then how they lay out their wings. And so there's always three really easy ones that I tend to remember. Is turkey vultures have a V, that dihedral flight. And so whenever you see a big dark bird in the sky that has that V shape, it's going to be a turkey vulture. If that big dark shape is not a V, but completely flat, like you could lay a board on it, then it's a good chance that's an eagle. See that same dihedral, but it's the other way around. And so it's more of a curved downward appearance on them. And that's a typical flight of an osprey. And so this is where when you're looking at the specks real far away, you can do a lot of ID just by looking at the silhouettes and just the gist of the bird, the general size and shape. And that really helps out to, even if you can't narrow it down to species, you can get it narrowed down to the category. So is it a buteo? Is it a accipiter? If you get an accipiter in Indiana, well, you can quickly narrow it down to just the three most common ones that we're going to see, the sharp-shinned Coopers or even rarely a goshawk. Mm-hmm. So the ID becomes a lot easier once you start learning some of these silhouettes.
So, Brett,
yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the V shape. I think you were talking about the vultures. And I can't quite picture from what angle are we seeing the V?
Yeah, so the V is so that their wings are pointed upwards.
Okay.
So looking at it kind of head on, so as they bank, and so not from the underside, but if you're looking at the bird from the side angle, that's where you're going to see that V shape where that warm air is pushing those wings up too. So those real long primary feathers get almost kind of curled upwards as they're kind of kiting around in the sky.
Okay, thank you.
These birds are, they look huge. A turkey vulture is like 72 inches in wingspan. So that's about, an average like 6 foot male. That's their wingspan if you're stretching your arms out. But even though they're so big, they are so light. It's nothing but feathers and hollow bones. And so there's not much weight that allows just a little bit of thermal to kind of pick these birds up. And I've held a pair of turkey vulture wings before, and it's amazing how lightweight they are. And Sam, do you have do we pass off or do I have them?
I think I might have one. Let me go check while you keep talking.
All right.
There's also a question in the chat for you as well.
Do we have more than a handful of incidental historical burrowing owls? I wish. No, I think there are 2 legitimate burrowing owl reports for Indiana. And so one of them was, I believe, 1933. And that was what they called Dune Park up along the lakefront. So that was an old train station, not the Dune Park that is today. It was kind of west of Coles Bog, actually right about where the steel mills are today. They had gotten off the train and there was a burrowing owl. And as was the tradition back in the 1920s and 30s is that you saw a bird like that and you needed to document it for science. So you blew it away with your gun, and that's what happened. And I think the specimen is actually at the Field Museum in Chicago. And documented that burrowing owl. Obviously, we don't do that today, and there's been another burrowing owl report that was on the far eastern end of the state. Most of these believed to be wanderers that come in from out west, not from the actual Florida population. There. So if you are looking for raptors, we're talking about we're seeing most of these guys in flight and they're able to do those thermals, and that's because most people tend to see just the turkey vultures and the buteos being able to fly. And do we have a turkey vulture wing that we can show off to folks there?
I believe it's this one.
There you go. Yeah, look how big that is. Big, giant thing. So real long primary feathers. So you're getting a lot of lift to just that, 1 or 2 pound bird that's in the middle of that. So huge. So when you're out there, what are the most abundant raptor? What is the most common bird of prey that we see reported in Indiana?
Red-tailed hawk.
Yeah.
Everybody says red tail?
Yep.
Unless we're counting turkey vultures.
We're not counting turkey vultures here. So outside of turkey vultures, most common abundant bird of prey. And unfortunately, what we can pull upon is, I have it right here, is Ken Brock has created the Brock Birds of Indiana. So this CD-ROM has records, and and he's been able to capture millions of bird records throughout the years, and including historical records, to actually come up with kind of the statistics of most common bird. And, it's kind of a game, especially in the wintertime, if you're driving on the interstate, to count how many red tails you see on a trip. They're always, sitting in every tree, and it's easy to see 20 or 30 red tails just in a couple-hour drive. So the most abundant one, there you go, red-tailed hawk. So 29.9% of all raptors by bird watchers in the state are red hawks. So, so this is like a checklist that has that bird on it. So compared to all the other raptor species, 29% of all reported raptors are red-tailed hawks. So that's the easy one. So what's number 2?
Coopers.
Other guesses?
Yeah, pretty good.
What's that?
Sharp-shinned.
Sharp-shin. So that can be, that's an abundant one in migration.
Unless people aren't reporting those and they're going for the iconic ones, in which case maybe bald
So that's
eagle.
probably something that happens as well. Some species get overlooked, or some species are a little more difficult to ID. So then they might just get, oh, well, it's an accipiter of some kind. So technically the most abundant raptor in Indiana, believe it or not, is broadwing hawk. And broadwing hawks steal the show because when you see one in migration, you see a lot of them. So you might see a kettle of 17 or even more broadwing hawks. So that's 20 different reports there. So we have red-tailed hawks, broadwing hawks number 2, sharp-shin, there's number 3, 12% of all reports. And again, at some of these hawk watching sites, sharp-shins can be pretty abundant. So you might be able to see 40 or 50 sharp-shins go by in a day, but you're only going to see a couple of Cooper's hawks. So they tend to go up a little higher in the abundance rating here for Indiana. Rounding out, though, after the top 3, though, believe it or not, we have northern harrier. A lot of reports of those guys. Percent of all reported raptors are harriers. And then the top 10. So we have bald eagles and red-shouldered hawk, rough-legged hawk, Cooper's hawk, and osprey. Round out the top 10 birds that we see. The rarest 3, gyrfalcon. We had one this spring, I believe in March. We had a report over by, was it Kingsbury? Kingsbury or Kankakee Fish and Wildlife here. I think Kankakee is where it was hosted this time. Someone photographed one. White and ferruginous hawk are the rarest ones that have been reported this far in Indiana.
Yeah.
That's cheating. We've had like one white-tailed kite.
Well, actually, the states had 3. That was the 3rd record there.
3.
Still rare. Ferruginous, I think it's been around 3, and gyrfalcon, I think that would be 2 records for gyrfalcon. No, maybe 3 for gyrfalcon.
Isn't there a ferruginous recently reported, like within the last couple weeks?
The couple that have shown up tend to be way down southern Indiana, and kind of those reclaimed mine areas is where they tend to see them the most. Okay. If you are going to do raptor ID, this is what you need. You need this guide right here. This is an amazing one. The Crosley guide, produced this a couple of years ago, and he had kind of a big field guide for all birds. But then he came out with the Crosley guide just for raptors. And the Crosley guide here, he's a different style than say if you have the Peterson guide. And I got a Peterson guide here, and there's what the old Peterson guide looked like when it came to hawks. And so they had these black and white plates that showed each of these different birds. And of course, one of the things that the Peterson guide did was point marks. So we had like the little arrows pointing to different spots on the bird. But the Crosley guides are definitely a different style guide. And one of the things that he offers, if I can pull it up, there you go, is these plates like this, if you've not seen it. And so this isn't a picture that he took out west of 23 kestrels that were all in one scene. He's able to take each one of these individual photos and basically use Photoshop and crop them out and put them onto a plate of where you might see this bird in typical habitat. And as you're looking up there, you see a lot of different poses, both flights and then perched. And you might think like up there on the right, that's a great picture there to identify a kestrel. But isn't the pictures way out there in the back where he's just a little speck? Isn't that how you see it anyway? And so that's where you can start to use general size and shape. And so that's where you're looking at those silhouettes and such to be able to identify these birds as they're flying by, or as you're seeing them as you're driving by at 65 miles an hour up there in the sky. It's a really great guide. be able to study birds, especially when you're studying hawks that are out there in flight, or things that are really far away. This becomes a good guide for. It's a little bigger, so you know, it's probably about the size of a letter paper, but much thicker there. So if you have this guide, it's probably not one that you're going to have sitting in your back pocket when you're out in the field. But it's a really good toilet guide. So you just keep it there and kind of flip through it there. And then for also far birds, they've also got it for water birds. So for like ducks and such that you're still in a distance, there's a whole nother Krause guide just for that. In addition to these single plates, he's also got this, quiz plates. So here we have more than one species of bird. Anyone recognize any of the birds that you see here? Can you name a species on that page? Come on, someone's got one of those.
Is that a black vulture on the bottom?
Yeah, on the bottom there is a black vulture. Has a kind of silver wingtips. Doesn't have the red head.
And some sort of kite.
We do have some kites there.
Bald eagle there.
So there's a bald eagle dead center of the picture. So there's a young bald eagle.
Yeah.
So the young bald eagle. I'm seeing a red-shouldered hawk in the lower left corner. You may see real easy feature there to identify is the split tail on a swallowtail kite that you see on the left side. I see peregrine falcons. Notice up the very top there, the really pointed wings there of a falcon. There's also a merlin that's a little more closer up front, right center there as well. You can see. So this kind of becomes fun as you're learning some of these. You can then actually quiz yourself on what the bird might look like out in the field. This is just an example of one of the plates that they have.
Who's this with the white butt next to the eagle?
So that would probably, I'm thinking that's a harrier.
Huh.
That white rump is pretty distinctive on harriers. Of course, he's got
a pointy looking face from that angle.
He's got his wings more spread than the typical flight we see. I just want to look at a couple of the species in the time because we don't have a whole lot of time today. Just some of the most confusing ones, and honestly, bald eagles are ones that if you get into middle to late March and into April, there is a pretty significant migration of eagles that comes through, not only because of our eagles that nest here in the state, but a lot of eagles that are moving northward. And some of our sites that are doing hawk watches north of us, say Rockaway Mountain in the Keweenaw or at Whitefish Point, they're seeing a couple hundred of these guys that are coming through here. And so we all know the typical adult one, but you don't realize that it takes 4 to 5 years for an eagle to look like that. And so there's like this whole series of progression of brown mottled kind of mutt-looking eagles before they actually get to the white face and white tail look. And I got a couple pictures of some of those. And so our early juveniles kind of have these what we call bulging secondaries. So notice that they're all brown, and you just kind of this modeling of white on them, all brown tail with a modeling of white on it. You don't really see much white there in the head at all, but that bulging secondary. So notice how we have the primaries, which are the first kind of about 10 flight feathers, the wing, and then we have this big block called the secondaries, and they stick out farther than the primaries do. And these are the first feathers that grow out on the bird. And a lot of birds, their first flight feathers are bigger than their adult feathers. Think of it as kind of like training wheels. And so they have a little extra lift on them until they can get to be a better flyer. And then they can have a little smaller feathers for more adept flying. Notice there is kind of a two-toned upper wing as well. And then when I say light axillaries, that's basically the underside, the armpits of the bird. You're going to see a little bit of whiteness under them when they're juvenile. And you can see that in the second picture there on the right. There's another picture. So this is a little older bird. So now we've actually probably about 2 years old now. Notice we have our primary feathers. Look for those bulging secondaries. So we have some old bulging secondaries and we have some new secondaries that aren't quite as long on that bird. So this bird here has still an increase in the modeling on the underside, but we're not getting any white in the head or white in the tail yet. So that's probably about a second winter bald eagle. And then you have this kind of progression then where they'll lose that white in the axillaries, and they'll start to kind of get kind of a dusky white in the head and tail before you get to that 4 or 5 year. And so this is where it becomes a problem, is that people see bald eagles like this in the 2nd and 3rd year, and they get confused for the other eagle, which is our our golden eagle. So here's another one. This is probably about 3 years old now, starting to get a little bit of white in the tail, but we're losing some of the white in the axillaries and the underside.
Brad, I think we can see your mouse if you put it on the screen. Could you use it to point out some of those features for us?
Can you guys see my mouse if I'm moving around?
Yes.
Oh, sweet. So there's the axillaries. So I'm talking about. So here I'm looking at those bulging secondaries. So right here, these are old secondaries that it grew out last year when it was a baby. And placed them with this block right here. So they're much fresher, cleaner, darker, and they don't come out as far as the old secondaries right there. So this is where we can actually see multiple ages in those flight feathers. And then over here, you can see where we're losing some of that white in the axillaries, and then we're gaining white here in the tail as we start to get a little bit older. And so this becomes something that some of the hawk watchers really get into is actually not only identifying a bald eagle, but then trying to age it as well up there in the sky. Take a look at here though, versus the golden eagle. And so this is where people see a lot of young bald eagles and they insist they saw a golden eagle. And golden eagles are much rare. In fact, today we have something like 400 nesting bald eagles in the state. And so, the old days of, oh my gosh, I saw an eagle, I need to report it to someone, are kind of gone. They're pretty common now, for the most part, as eagles go. Where golden eagles are a lot more uncommon because they're mainly a western species, and then up there farther north into almost near the Canadian Arctic for some of these. So to see a golden eagle, it's much rare, but they are usually much more uniform dark brown, and you don't see the white mottling. There is a spot where they do have white on them, and it's typically when they're juveniles. So here's an image there where you start to see white at the base of the tail. And then you have white markings in the inner bases of some of the primaries. And so you get these kind of white mark here and here, but notice you don't have a lot of the white axillaries on them. And of course, if you get in the right light, you can see that golden nape on a golden eagle, but it's not always that evident when you see it, especially if you see it a lot of times it's in the wintertime. It's February and March when you're here, and it's bad lighting, it's usually cloudy and gloomy. So it's kind of hard to see some of those features. So golden eagles are much rare, but they are present. You usually get about 4 or 5 golden eagle reports every year. So here's 3 pictures of 3 eagles. Can you tell me which one is bald and which one's a golden eagle?
If the one on the left is bald.
One on the left is a bald eagle, correct.
I'm going to go with the one on the right is also bald, based on what he's eating and the kind of white on his face.
So the other feature there is golden eagles are hunters. Our bald eagle, our regal national symbol, is a big scavenger. And so they don't do a lot of hunting on their own. But they do a lot of fishing. And then, of course, stealing food from other animals as well. So the fact that you see the fish, that's a good sign. So the one on the far left is a bald eagle. The one on the far right is a bald eagle. Now, what about the middle one? No one's yelling it out, right?
Do golden eagles also have bulging primaries?
They can have a little bit,
Or
but
secondaries?
don't have. They can have the bulging secondaries, but remember the bald eagle has more of the two-tone, and it's more uniform on a golden. So if you haven't figured it out yet, none of them are golden. They're all bald eagles. Just to show you how tricky it can be, how easy it is to try to make something into a golden eagle when it's not. And so, and just if you consider abundance too, it's more likely to be a bald eagle. And so this is where I use what Dr. Dunning at Purdue taught me was the horse-zebra rule. If you don't know the horse-zebra rule, so say you're walking down a county road and here behind you, you hear clip-clop. Think it's probably a horse, not a zebra. So tend to kind of go for the most common thing first and then eliminate that. if you do indeed have a zebra out there. So they're all balds. A couple others we'll just look at here real quickly in the time that we got left. Red-tailed hawks, because it is the most abundant one. 29.9% of all hawks seen are red tails, and they are so highly variable, not just here in Indiana, but if you look across the range, all the way to the west, you have all these different morphs that really kind of add to the confusion of it. And people say, well, you know, I had a clear chest here, or I had a clear belly here. And so that is so highly variable. So it's up and down, how much streaking you see, especially if you're driving by on the highway, you see them facing the sun. It can look really bright and shiny, and you may not even see a red on the tail, because just like the eagles, it takes about 2 to 3 years for a red-tailed hawk to become an adult and actually have the rufous red tails on them. But it's our big, full-bodied, big, broad-winged hawk that we see soaring around the most often. They tend to be really flat in the wings when they're flying. And what I notice is they're kind of a cross between how the vulture flies and how the eagle flies. And so it's really flat with just a little bit of curl at the end. And so if you see just a little bit of a slight dehedral, then a good chance it's probably gonna be a red tail. Finnass in Indiana, do we see mostly juvenile goldens or mature? We see mainly young juveniles, and they're gonna be the most abundant one because there are more of them. So you have them born every year. It takes them several years to get to the adult phase. So we tend to see more of them wandering around, but we do see adults as well. It'd be interesting to check with Ken Brock on what the percentages reports are. But me personally, I've seen more juveniles than I have seen the adults. So we talk about the slight dehedral. And the other thing I want to show you that's a really distinctive mark for red tails, if you can see my mouse again on this middle bird, is what we call the dark patagial bar. And I'm talking about patagial bar. Let's see, I think I even have, if I advance the slide, there we go, that's it right there. And so basically it's the leading shoulder of the bird is dark on a red-tailed hawk. And notice if you go left of that patagial mark on the wing, right here is a comma. And so the comma is right at the base of where the primaries are. And so if you notice this from afar, you're going to start to see this kind of dark leading bar with a little comma mark on them. And that's pretty distinctive for a red-tailed hawk up in flight. And you can see that really far away. And you'll see that if you look at the Crosley guide, even some of those far ones, you get that general size and shape of that patagial mark. Oops. So there's a juvenile red-tailed hawk. See that they don't have that red tail on them. And then the modeling on the back can be very variable as well. So here's looks like a blurry plate from Crosley of red-tailed hawks. But even on a blurry plate, do you see all those distant birds have the dark patagial bar? Look at this one in the upper left. You can see the dark bar, and then I can see the little comma mark on them. And I can see that in almost every one of these birds that are soaring by. But notice that the underside coloration and markings in the belly is highly variable. A couple more let's look at that I think are fun is I love the rough-legged hawks. So it's only slightly smaller, but it looks generally about the same size as a red-tailed hawk. This is a bird that's really unique because they only spend their winters here in Indiana. And as a boodio, it's really similar in size and shape to a red tail when you see them in the distance, but they have very distinctive behavior that really sets them apart. This is a bird that's spending its summer up in the Arctic. So when he's up there in the Arctic, there's no trees. So this is a bird that is adapted to kind of perch on the top of the smallest little shrubs and small trees that are up there in the Arctic to get the most vantage point of everything that he's looking for. So he's not used to sitting in the middle of a tree. He's always on tip top. So when he gets down to Indiana, he takes that same behavior. And so he's either going to be on a telephone pole, or if he finds a tree, he's going to be on the tip top of it with his much smaller feet. So he's got these smaller feet with these excessive feathers that come down and basically kind of cover the legs, which gives him that rough-legged name there. His underside can be very variable. So we see usually more of a wider chest with a darker belly band, but we have a light phase and a dark phase on these guys. And look at that guy in flight. The other thing they have is when I talked about the patagial bar that the red tails have, he doesn't have it. And remember that black comma that's there at the beginning of the primaries? He has big big blotches. And so you see that in flight, those big black blotches and then this black tail band on him. So really when you're looking at the coloration features, he's very different than a red tail in flight. Here's the dark phase. So I would say, you know, it seems like about 7 out of 10 I see are light, and then occasionally you'll see a dark phase. So basically all those light areas of the belly and the leading edge of the wing are all black instead. And but he's still got the big black splotches there where that little comma is on a red tail. I guess I don't know the name of that specific location of the bird, but right at the base of the primaries. The other thing that's kind of fun is that this is one when you're cruising down the highway in the wintertime, you can identify them really quickly, even if they're just silhouettes, because of that behavior I talked about. So when you see a hawk, red-tailed hawks in the winter, they're right there. They're in the middle of the tree, maybe up a little higher, but they're out in these kind of these, not all the way out to the outer branches, but they're perched, watching for prey when you're going down the highway. A rough-legged hawk takes that same behavior from the Arctic and he applies it here to Indiana, and he will always be in the tip top of a tree. So if you're cruising down, I think a great spot I go see him is at Kankakee Sands in Northwest Indiana, and you're just cruising down 41, you're going to see that hawk that's in the tip top of that tree, and I know right away without even getting close to see the field marks on it, it's a rough-legged hawk by that behavior. A couple more let's do here. Let's look at the accipiters really quickly. So our accipiters, you know, the main two ones are sharpshin and Coopers. They're real difficult to ID. Sharpshins are a lot smaller, and the smallest of the male Sharpies can only be like, you know, 8 or 9 inches high. Females are going to be a little bit bigger, but then that's about the same size as the male Coopers. And of course, the female Coopers are the biggest of them all. The streaking can be highly variable, so they're often best identified when they're in flight by looking at a couple features on them. And so compared, you know, look at that little male Sharpshin, just to show you how small they get. Here's our Coopers, often much larger, square-headed appearance, real long tail compared to some of the other accipiters. And this is where we're going to be looking at their tail tips and their flight style to be able to identify them. So there's a much larger Coopers that she's holding there. So that's probably a female Coopers that she's got. So compare that to the much smaller Sharpshin that we saw earlier. But look at these guys in flight. So Coopers, what's interesting is because of that larger head, and so you can see there in the upper right picture, so where their head extends, and then you can see the tail, where what we have there is we have some outer tail feathers of the Sharpshin that can be really long, so that it tends to notch off the tail, where you have more of kind of a progression of longer tails in the inner part of a Cooper's and shorter on the outer, so it gives it more of a rounded tail appearance. Now, even looking at those images, it's pretty hard to tell those guys apart, but generally, because of that bigger head, it sticks out beyond the wrists of the bird when a Cooper's flying by, and it tends to be more in line with the wrists of the bird for a sharp-shinned hawk. But even those can be fairly hard to identify. So just looking at that, and if I were to show you that, what hawk is that?
Coopers?
What hawk is that?
Sharp-shinned by the tail.
So it kind of looks like a sharp-shinned by the tail. Here's
I was thinking if we draw that line. Yeah.
And there's one other fine thing that we can look at when we have like an image of the bird that we referred to earlier back here. And let me go back to the Sharpshin. And so we do have some of the streaking can vary much. So it tends to be a little more narrow on the males and broadly streaked on the females. So if I go back to that, does that help at all? So it is pretty broadly. So there's a good chance this might be a female bird, so a larger bird. It does look a little bigger in size. You know, this is one of those that this shows you, and I put this one in here because I actually don't know what it is. Maybe some experts that actually have a little better idea and will say right away. I think this is a Cooper's hawk, and I think just the way there's a little kind of tweak to the outer tail feathers that's sticking it out a little more and making it look a little more notched. But that just shows how difficult it can be identifying these guys in flight. So here we go. Let's just kind of end up with a little quiz here for you guys. Now, there's a lot of things we didn't cover. We didn't talk about the falcons. We didn't talk a lot about the owls. We didn't go in depth on the ospreys or harriers. But let's see if you guys can identify any of these. Number one. Anyone know what number one is?
It's a male harrier.
Number one is a harrier. Number two Anyone know what that one is?
Some sort of accipiter?
I'm not sure if I know what number 2 is. So that's the thing is, I'm looking at that one and I'm not so sure if I do know it. Let's go back to it. Number 3.
That falcon with the name I don't know how to pronounce. Gyre falcon? Gyre falcon?
You know what? It's a buteo.
Huh.
So we have some Western species on here. Is what I think we got going on.
Gave him a trick ID trivia.
We should do some easier ones. Number 19.
Number 19. Red tail.
Number 19, red tail. I'm trying to find it in the book here that we took this from. How about number 18?
Also red tail.
Number 18, look at the patagial mark and that comma in the wings. So number 18 is indeed a red-tailed hawk. Here we go. I found the actual page. So number.
I feel like there are multiple red tails on this page.
There are, and so that's just to show you that variability and to kind of trick you up. 274. Here we go. Oh yeah. That makes sense now. So number 2, that's your female harrier.
Oh, okay.
Number 3, that is a broadwing hawk. And so they tend to have this kind of bordering outer tail feathers. I'll use that mouse there to show you right here I'm sorry, not tail feathers, on the flight feathers, dark border. So you did 18 and 19, you got those right as well. How about number 11?
Hmm.
11 and then number 12. So really long-winged and long.
Oh, that's another harrier.
It's another harrier. Compare it to number 1, just a different angle. Number 12.
Juvenile bald.
So number 12, we do have bald eagles. So those are all immatures. 13, we didn't go in depth on these guys. But 13 and, let me tell you, 13 and 14 are the same thing.
Peregrines?
Long-winged. Long wing, long tail, made for flight, speed. Those are peregrine falcons. Number 8 are sharp-shinned hawks up there in the upper left corner. Number 7, we kind of mixed in there, so you probably recognize that as a turkey vulture. And my chat box is hiding some of those in the corner. Let me move that there. So down there, oh no. Number 21, that's a kestrel. And number 22, that's our other falcon there. So that's a merlin that we have. One more. Look at that. You wanna know what those are?
The raptors, all of them.
You are right. They are raptors. Is it? Are they short-eared owls?
I'm gonna go with no on that one.
No.
No, not. You might notice they are the same species.
Are they an eastern species?
It is. To be a picture taken in Indiana. Do you see a patagial bar in the comma mark?
No.
No. Especially that one in the upper left, you can tell that he is a buteo. Doesn't have that long of a tail, even though it's kind of flared out, but in banded tail. We have nice kind of broad buteo wings on it. And where else, what species do you see that migrates in large numbers like this from the tropics?
And that leaves us with a broad-winged or rough-legged, but they don't have the blotches. So,
so rough-leggeds don't migrate like this, and we would see the big black marks on the underside of the wing on a rough-legged. So yeah, these are broad-winged hawks, all in migration that you might see in mid-April through early May here in Indiana. And so obviously we could spend quite a long time talking all about birds of prey and all about all the different raptors as well. And I am trying to close that out and I lost my screen. Here we go. There we go. And so that's my hawk watching basics for this morning's coffee and COrVIDs. So I will turn it back to Sam. And if you guys have any questions, the one question I did see is from John. In general, what is the health of the raptor population? And so raptors are under constant barrage of different threats, and DDT was the big one, 50 years ago, that they recovered from that. But we do have current threats like West Nile virus, which poses more of a threat to birds of prey, especially species that only have a couple young a year. So it's not like they're having 6 or 7 babies and they can do it multiple times. They tend to bounce back better, like robins and blue jays and such. But the raptors, when they're only having 1 or 2 young, if they take a hit, it takes them a little longer. So the overall health, I think, is good for our birds of prey. A lot of them are coming back from the former numbers that we had. Some of them are still kind of more flat, and there hasn't been a lot of movement. I don't know too many of our birds of prey that are in serious decline. The declines that we do have, though, are usually has to do with habitat, and we still have kind of pollution and poisoning that may be occurring on them. But habitat loss and the ability to find prey is probably the number one losses that we have for some of our birds that are in decline. But generally, they're okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brad. We appreciate it. That was great info. And yeah, you could keep talking for another few hours on that for sure. So thank you again. We appreciate it. I do have a small, of course, ID game for the end. It isn't near as hard as some of Brad's pictures, and I pulled pictures from Indiana as well. And the winner will get, I don't have any hawk related things, but I do have some OwlNet project things to give away as well. So those raptors, they count. So just give me a second to share my screen. So for the ID game, what we're going to do is give points to the first 1 or 2 people that answer it correctly. If you're doing it on Facebook, feel free to join in. And then we just do it in the chat rather than out loud. So make sure to get your chat open as well. I just have 7 of them, or 6 in like kind of a bonus one. So Raptors of Indiana ID. All right, let me get my chat. All right, so again, we're doing the answers in the chat to potentially win the OwlNet hat and sticker. Here is the first one.
Wonder what features we see on that one.
Well, the bar on the shoulders and the comma and the red tail.
All right, I gave Facebook some time to answer, and the correct answer is, you guys are correct, red-tailed hawk. Had to start out with the most abundant one, right? I didn't even know it was most abundant, but I guess it is. All right, next one.
As we were talking about the V shape, the flat, and then the kind of the curved down wing pattern.
All right, this guy, nice work, is the osprey. Good job.
Looks just like the backpack we carry around, right?
Yeah, totally. All right, next one. All right, any other guesses? It is the red-shouldered hawk. Nice work.
For red shoulders, one of the ID tricks when these guys are in flight, because you don't really see that much red in them, is they have in the outer primary feathers this kind of crescent of translucent feathers. So like the sun almost shines through them. And I don't know if you can see, this is in the, did I say tail? I meant the wing. So out there in the wing where she's pointing on the mouse, right in the tip, there's this almost like crescent moon of lighter color there, but then it gets darker again on the tip. And so those little crescent moon of the transparent feathers is a feature of red shoulders that broadwings don't have.
Is that eating a fish?
He's got something in his talons.
Do they eat fish?
Well, they are in wooded, swampy areas a lot, often near water. And this is the one that I see carrying around frogs and snakes quite commonly. And up in the dunes in Beverly Shores, they fly around with water snakes quite a bit. So it wouldn't surprise me if they eat fish as well.
Cool. All right, next one.
There's a giveaway field mark on that bird.
All right, last chance. It is the rough-legged hawk.
Obviously dark phase, but you can see the dark marks there at the basically what would be the wrist, dark wrist of the bird.
All right, next guy.
Where's the bird's wrist?
So the wrist would be where the primaries are attached to. So you can see where the bend is in the wing. That would be the wrist of a bird. So follow that down to that. So that's basically the forearm is the patagial stripe, and then the bend is the actual wrist. And so then what you call just the feathers would be like basically like the fingers of the bird. So if you go back to that rough-legged that we just had. So where those big black splotches were, that would be the wrists.
So what often looks like a bump on the front of the wing.
Yep, that's basically the wrist of the bird.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. This guy again.
Real long tail.
Any other guesses? I don't have any on Facebook, so we'll go with it is the Cooper's hawk. Nice job, Gail.
Real proportionally long tail. Notice the big bulging head extending beyond the wrists of the bird. If you were to draw that imaginary line.
All right, I think I have two more, maybe just one. I do have one more after this, for sure.
Tricky one.
I tried to make the harder ones at the end, hopefully. Start with the red tail, right? Give people a few more seconds. All right, this guy is the short-tailed hawk.
So you slipped in one that wasn't from Indiana.
Sorry. Tried to fool you. All right. Last one. Now this one I know has been spotted in Indiana, but is not very often.
Go back to those rarest ones that have been seen.
Give you a hint. It was on his top 3 of the rarest.
Swainson's?
Not a Swainson. It is ferruginous, or however you pronounce it, that I can never get right.
Notice with the ferruginous, you don't have the patagial bar arm, but you still have that comma that the red tail has, and typically much cleaner white. But there's a lot of variation in ferruginous, and if you get out west, you'll see a lot more of them. Swainson's are real two-toned underside of really dark trailing edge of all the feathers with kind of a white up front, and they have a really distinct, really big, long wing, almost harrier-like look to them without that real long tail, if you happen to spot a Swainson's here or out west.
Awesome. That is all I have for my ID game. And the winner of the ID game is Finn. Congratulations. I will, if you send me your address in a private chat, I will send your stuff your way. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. This is Coffee and COrVIDs, hosted by the Indiana Audubon Society. And we will be back with our Coffee and COrVIDs in 2 weeks, same time, same Zoom link, July 1st at 10 a.m. Eastern. We're having the urban birder, David Lindo, will be joining us live from Spain. So make sure to check in on that. That's July 1st, 10 a.m. Eastern, same place. Otherwise, you can join us next Wednesday, the 24th. We have our Pints and Passerines, which is like the sister evening version of Coffee and COrVIDs. Our guest speaker for that is going to be Wes Hamoya, who's an expert birder, and it's hosted by, or sponsored by, the Ash and Elm Cidery. And I heard they're giving away a gift card, and they're down in Indianapolis. So make sure to join that as well. Otherwise, if you guys have any questions, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.